So, welcome to our second session in the See Me, Me and You series. We hope you enjoyed our first podcast looking at identity and how we can live authentic lives. So now we're going to focus on exploring how and when we need to adapt to others. I'm Lizzie from See Me, and I'm joined again by Simon Wilsher, Chair of See Me Behaviour Profiling. Welcome, Simon.
Thank you, Lizzie.
So, Simon, we talked last time about how we are all unique and how See Me profiles can help us understand our own preference combination more fully. But is there a time when we need to perhaps have a willingness to adapt our natural behaviour to bring out the best in others?
Yes, all the time. And here's the irony. We find people who understand their unique identity and stay true to it, being themselves, living authentically, are the happiest and the most effective. Is at a fundamental level, but at the next level, bringing out the best in others is what we're talking about today, isn't it?
Yes.
Our natural tendency is to relate to people as if they were identical to us because we're busy being authentic. And it gives us that sure-footedness and the confidence that's visible and admirable. But most people we relate to have different preferences to us, whether that be in the family or whether they're colleagues, friends, or colleagues at work. They think differently, they probably feel differently, communicate a little bit differently. And let's assume that 80% of people have different preferences to us. If we're always doing things and saying things our way, the way we prefer it, what percentage of people are receiving us well? Wow.
Quite low.
20% is not great. 1 in 5.
Okay.
Not a lot. So adapting to the other 80% makes a huge difference.
Fantastic. But Simon, how on earth do we begin to approach this?
Yeah. First of all, let's acknowledge that it's not what most people think about. Most of us are so busy and probably under pressure a lot of the time. We only get as far as asking ourselves, how can we be our very best for others? Now, that's very noble and worthwhile. But that being said, we need leverage, real added value, and that can be seen when we discover how we get the best for and from each other.
And Simon, obviously sometimes we probably do this, we choose to kind of go down the route of not adapting or not choosing to flex our behaviour to somebody else's style. And what happens if we do that?
3 things. First of all, there's less understanding of each other. Secondly, less connection in communication.
Right.
And more conflict.
Okay.
And thirdly, less satisfaction and progress.
Simon, could you kind of give us an example? I know you've worked in businesses and in life in general, but perhaps a business example.
Yeah, I mean, one that sticks in mind happened very recently. We worked with 2 organizations that rely on each other to deliver results, services to the public. And these are 2 organizations that have worked together for 10 years. But to say they were at war with each other is not really an understatement, because that's what they would say, we're at war with each other. And our purpose was to help them to collaborate and get to a state where they could really enjoy working together and be as effective as possible. And the amazing thing that happened, did the color profiling with them. And one of the MDs said to the other, I've been working with you for 10 years, and I never realized that when you would say to me, just leave it with me, I'll come back to you in the morning, it wasn't a ruse or a technique, it's just the way you prefer to communicate. And somehow that makes it easier to accept. So I'm going to give you the space.
Okay.
I know you operate best, but it's interesting, in the 10 years, I didn't realize that.
They just didn't get it over the 10 years.
And
That's incredible.
These are 2 capable people. So sometimes the temperament differences are not that visible.
Okay, it's really lovely to hear kind of a See Me story and kind of see the difference that it makes. And so we understand that there really is a time and probably a place for adapting. But after our last session, Simon, where we looked at identity and we talked a lot about staying true to it and positive self-talks and talking about yourself, how do we know how much to adapt and how much then to stay true to who we are? You've kind of got these 2 things. Yeah. How do we know?
Great question. And that's the paradox.
Right.
Yeah. Sometimes we can't be best by being ourselves because the other person's situation or style won't permit it. But it's not a question of either being true to ourselves or adapting to the other. The secret is knowing when best to adapt and when best to be ourselves.
Okay, so you're saying, is it that we perhaps need to pause, we need to think about the other person and actually be intentional about bringing a slightly adapted style to the situation if it will bring out the best in them? Is that what we're saying? Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, that's right. But here's an analogy a lot of people find helpful. When we're working or we're living or raising young children, of the many things that we try and bring out in them, one would be creativity and initiative and imagination, and the other is telling the truth and having integrity and being honest and all those good things. So let's imagine that we've got a young child, say 3, 4, 5 years old, and they're telling a story, and we're encouraging them, and they tell stories beautifully. And then the next day, they actually, something happens, and they make something up. And we say, no, you've got to tell the truth. Now this poor kid is saying, hold on a second, 1 minute you're asking me to be creative, and the next minute you're saying you've got to tell it exactly like it is. It's kind of confusing. But of course it's a little bit like that. It's not a question of saying either be creative or honest. It's a question of teaching or helping the child understand when to be creative and when to be honest, as it were. It's the same with when are we being authentic on ourselves and when do we adapt with other people.
And Simon, how do we get better at knowing when to lean into our natural style and when to modify our behaviour? And then how can See-Me profiles, can they help us do that? How do they help us do that?
Yeah. Well, again, the starting point is really understanding ourselves, because it's only that way, as we were saying last time, that we can be authentic and our best selves. And then really getting to know how the other person prefers to behave actually takes conscious effort. It takes better energy, better thought, better observation. And then once we've got that idea, because if you read your own profile, of course, you're going to get lots of clues as to what's right for you. Read the other person's profile or learn a little bit about the color combinations, and you begin to recognize patterns and clues as to their preferred ways of doing things. So it's a bit of a journey.
Right.
But one that's well worth going on.
So you almost become more familiar with that other person's style. What else can help us, Simon?
I think, in the report, there's sections on communication, there's how people operate in teams, there's each person's blind spot. So if you have access to their report, of course, that's a huge advantage. And of course, many organizations use it for exactly that reason. But once you've got to grips with the colors, then we can start to test our knowledge. And it might be that we have clues as to their preferred ways of communicating or decision making, or relating or taking part in a team. And we would just start to experiment really and try different styles or make suggestions, etc. And after a while, we say practice makes perfect. It might not be true, but practice makes a little bit more. What's the word I'm looking for? Competent or practiced in that area. Or, you know what I mean? And one of the practical thing is that I try and use all the time to this day. Before I go into a meeting, especially if it's a really important meeting, I will spend time thinking about who's chairing, who are the main influencers, what are their preferred ways of doing things. I will remind myself, even though I kind of know it, and I then am prepared in order to relate to that person, say verbally, in terms of decision making, in line with their preference rather than just mine, and it works a treat.
So in the preparation, it just allows you to adapt or to choose to when you need to.
Yeah.
I can see how that works, Simon, with somebody you're going into a meeting and you can do some prep. But how do you do it for those, say, in a new business meeting or an interview, and you're not entirely sure who you're meeting? How does that work?
A little more tricky, as I think you are suggesting in your question. And it is people give us signs all the time. There's little indicators. It might be the speed with which they talk. It might be the amount of patience they've got as you're exploring a situation and their desire to get to the bottom of something and not move on until they're clear. Or it might be people want to just get straight to the action. It might be the habit. Sometimes, you're conscious that people are tapping their fingers as you're explaining something, and they're really saying, "Come on, move
Right.
on." And even when you look around visually, sometimes the way we dress, or how the promptness of a meeting, or the determination. There's so many clues. Let me just give you a very quick example, and I've never forgotten this. Years ago, the very first business meeting I had in London, I was told, when you go to somebody and you have a meeting, it's very polite in this society just to make small talk, but not really intentional small talk, but just to be courteous and ask some questions about themselves. And I went into this meeting, and it was an advertising agency, and I started to say, "Oh man, beautiful office, and he's looking over Barclay Square. It must be wonderful to work here." And he looked at me, with what I think I remember as disdain, and he said, "Sorry, what did you come here for?"
Oh, okay.
Okay, I think I better get into the purpose of the meeting. Now, whilst that's an obvious sort of clue, people give us clues all the time.
Fantastic. Thank you, Simon. Thank you for that story. Could you give us an example where you have been, you've had to adapt, and that's kind of in the business setting, and it's brought success? So you've chosen to adapt, and it's brought success.
Two very quick examples. One I won't name, but a guy, amazing man, president CEO of a household name, and his preference was very strong action orientation, rigorous debate, did not want to hear what you agreed with, only wanted to hear if you disagreed. And I learned very quickly, prepare well, have your facts, and get very quickly to what you thought he might not agree with, and that he was absolutely fine with that.
Right.
People were petrified of this man. I tell you, I got on so well with him, because I'd say, "Hey, I suspect you're going to think this, but I will see it differently. Let me tell you why." And he'd lean back and he'd smile and he'd say, "Yeah, tell me, because it's a probably rubbish way." And I'd laugh and we'd debate it. And a lot of the time, he'd say, "Okay, if that's what you think, go for it."
Fantastic.
It was just such a good relationship. Corresponding, let me give you another example, probably a little bit more everyday. Teacher at the school our children went to, and this person was very detailed, didn't like giving a view until he'd got his reports and his data and all this stuff. And then he liked to make decisions.
Okay.
He didn't want you as a parent to say, "I think we should be doing this, this, and this." Yeah, you could see the flicker of, "Excuse me, what do you know about your own child?" flicker across his face. And I learned that, first of all, you get the detail, and then you say, "Here are the options. I think we got three things. What do you think?" And I got on exceptionally well with that teacher, and he really loved dealing with us. And most people would say, "Oh, that person, it's just so awkward. How do you deal?" I can't even know. Just so opinionated. But actually, once we learned that he needed to get hold of the detail, work his way through it, and then be decisive, that was his way of operating. You'd think as a teacher he'd probably pick up his clues and be more flexible.
Yeah.
Yeah, hadn't been in his training.
But in that situation, you chose to be flexible.
Correct.
And to prepare.
Correct.
And to go in there. And what would have happened, Simon? I mean, if you hadn't.
Oh, absolutely. So he would shut people down.
Right, okay.
And so he not only had this register, this child is a waste of space, or, not worth investing in, but he had this map of which parents were worth talking to. I'm exaggerating slightly, but
sure.
It was definitely there. So, it makes a big difference.
Anything else you want to add, Simon, before we end?
I think that when we get practiced at working out people's preferred ways of doing things and being able to play what we call the away game, play with their preferences, it definitely reduces the number of conflicts, and it helps us to feel better about the other person. Because my experience is all the time people are different. If we don't understand the difference, psychologically people are saying, "Well, that person's a bit of an idiot." They just don't get it.
Yeah.
Because actually maybe it's more they get it in a different way. And I find most people, by understanding the way in which people are different, or the way they operate differently, changes the way we feel about that person as well. So it just enriches and makes relationships better.
Thank you so much, Simon, for sharing all this with us. And Simon, I believe the next discussion is taking a look at colourful relationship. What do you have in store for us?
Well, it's going to be exciting because we'll have a look at colours in more depth.
Fantastic.
So how can we read the clues and
Yeah.
get good at it? And then also some top tips about what to do and what not to do for each colour. So yeah, big good session.
Sounds great. Thanks again, Simon. And do look out for our podcast available on our website, colour-profiling.com, or get in touch to find out more. Again, details are all on our website, colour-profiling.com. Thank you.